Welcome in once again to the most accurate podcast in the entire world. It is the Friday morning, November 8th. This has been quite the week, particularly if you listen to this podcast from the United States of America. My name is Matt Okada. I'm here with John Paulson. We got, regardless of whatever happened earlier in the week, we got a great Thursday night football game last night. Impressively did not disappoint because expectations were incredibly high for the Bengals and Ravens. Coming out of that, heading into the weekend, John, how are you feeling?
Doing all right. Just a reminder on the Q&A, we only get to a few questions each week, so we like to answer the sort of macro, larger picture strategy questions, not so much the start-sit stuff. But if you have a super chat, we'll get to it. But just a reminder, if you want your question answered, ask something that makes us think a little bit.
True. So it ended up being 35-34 Ravens last night, despite a very late touchdown from the Bengals. They went for a 2-point conversion, missed it, and of course, now Troy Aikman will harp for the rest of the season about how you shouldn't do such things because he hates analytics. You should do such things. They just happen to miss it. Insane game, particularly if you started or played against Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. Chase Brown also had a great game. Lamar Jackson was great, of course. Across the board, pretty good. But the standouts for sure were, Jamar Chase was the very top. He had 11 catches for 264 yards and 3 touchdowns. Absurd. Is there any question for you that he's the number one wide receiver rest of the season?
Well, I think Justin Jefferson might have something to say about this. I think Chase's splits with T. Higgins throughout his career have been, I would not say modest, but they've been less than overall wide receiver one. So he's really benefiting from Higgins' absence, and he's got 17 targets. And yeah, basically, if you're facing Jamar Chase, this week, you could take a long walk on Sunday, go to the beach, find something to do. Your fantasy team is probably not going to pull out the win. Rest in peace, week 10. But that's the way it goes. Maybe one of your players does this, but it's unlikely. True. 264 yards, 11 catches, 3 touchdowns. Pretty incredible game from that standpoint. And Chase Brown didn't run the ball particularly well, 42 yards. I don't think that was shocking against the Ravens, but he did have 9 catches for 52 yards. So in full PPR, half PPR formats, got the rushing touchdown, ended up with a real nice day. And I'll just lastly touch on Mike Gesicki because I've gotten into a few Twitter arguments. I don't know if argument's the right word. Debates. One guy has said that it's a bad pick. Bengals don't target their tight end. Stop going to the Bengals tight ends if you want fantasy points. And my response is he had 9 targets.
Yes.
In the last 2 games.
Tanner Hudson had 7.
Even if you toss out last week's game where he got 100 yards and 2 touchdowns and basically won the week for you if you started him. In week 2 with Higgins out, he went for 7 for 91 on 9 targets. In week 9 with Higgins out, or was it week 8 with Higgins out, 7 for 73 and 8 targets before that huge game last week. So you can't just assume that a team's not going to target the tight end. If I had told you, Matt, that the Bengals were going to score 34 points, I'm not going to tell you Gesicki's line, but you know what he did in the last 3 games with Higgins out. You know that Mike Gesicki's going to get 9 targets.
Auto start.
And they're all from Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow does not get knocked out of the game. You would think that Mike Gesicki's going to have a pretty good game, right?
100%.
Process.
Yes. Process. Hopefully we get some more goodness out of that. Although if and when T. Higgins returns, that takes a knock a little bit. And also, and this is just worth noting across the board, it is the Ravens defense. They are the best pass funnel in the entire NFL. If you have pass catchers or throwers against the Ravens the rest of the season, just know Nobody stops the run better than them. Nobody gives up the pass worse than them or better than them. I don't know what language you want to use there, but it showed up in this game big time. Quickly, just really quickly on Chase Brown before hitting on whatever's left for the Ravens. It feels like he's kind of snuck his way into very, very good running back territory. I'm curious where you have him rest of season. Like, is he a mid-range RB2 at this point? Better?
Yeah, I mean, with Zach Moss out, they made the trade for Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert comes in, fumbles immediately.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to laugh, but like, what a debut! Like, you can't even like catch the handoff correctly or secure the handoff correctly in your first. I don't know how much he played. I'm interested to see the snaps, but he came
Not
out.
much.
And they showed him on the sideline looking kind of sad. Right now, Chase Brown RB22, but I mean, there's quite a few guys. If you look at the guys ahead of him, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, Brian Robinson, Aaron Jones, James Conner. I mean, these are bell cow lead backs. I think he's moving into that territory though, due to what's going on with the backfield in terms of, Zach Moss being out for the year. Khalil Herbert is a pretty talented back as well, so I could see him sort of getting into that Moss role, but I don't think he's as good of a pass catcher as Moss was. So I think you still see Chase Brown in that 60-70% touch role, even though he did a lot more than that last night due to the late trade and then Herbert coming in and fumbling immediately.
Yes, the snap count for Khalil Herbert was a grand total of 2. Travion Williams also got 1. Other than that, 66 for Chase Brown. So, yeah. Also, they brought in Khalil Herbert, one would imagine, because they needed the depth. They weren't feeling too great about Zach Moss. So, and Brown's just played so well that he may have played his way into a much heavier role, even if and when Zach Moss comes back. Very briefly on the Ravens side, Derrick Henry scored a touchdown again. He's locked and loaded. It wasn't his best game, all things considered, but he's scoring a touchdown every week, and he's going to be a top-end running back. The receiving group was a little wonky, especially given the fact that, Lamar Jackson threw 290 yards and 4 touchdowns. Zay Flowers had a really bad game. Rashad Bateman managed to score a touchdown, but I don't know how many people started him. Nelson Aguilar also stole a touchdown. Mark Andrews has been consistent, finally, so I think we can trust him now. And then Tylan Wallace, who's mostly been a returner, scored a massive touchdown and had a couple other interesting plays. With Deontay Johnson also there now, who did nothing, by the way, I think just overarching breakdown, what do you expect from this group moving forward for fantasy purposes? Because that seems very validly important to anyone who has these guys or is looking to make moves around them.
Well, I just want to touch on Derrick Henry initially. I'm sure his managers are like, not happy with this after, 68 yards and a touchdown is well below what he has delivered, but that's still a solid game from your running back. I was expecting more out of him, but he only got the 16 carries and never really had that big, long run like he usually breaks one. He's on pace now for 23.8 touchdowns for the season. And I wrote and told everybody that I would listen to me that he had legit 20 touchdown upside. He was on a 2,000 yard rush pace. I have to check that, but I think he's probably fallen behind that a little bit with the 68 yards rushing. I just wanted to touch on that. Deontay Johnson's usage was a little confusing because I think he actually played more snaps last week than this week. He tweeted, there's 2 sides to every story. I don't know I think that was this week or that was yesterday or today. If I didn't dig into the legitimacy of that tweet, those wide receiver tweets could have come from any time in any place and be pulled up and retweeted and be applicable. So I mean, that was interesting. It's almost like at this point, he's a depth piece for them because, Bateman 6 for 54 and touchdown on 8 targets, leading the team in targets. You wouldn't have expected that. Deontay Johnson is a better receiver, but Bateman has that rapport with Lamar Jackson. And then this Tylan Wallace kind of comes out of nowhere with that 84-yard touchdown catch. But I want to touch on Mark Andrews. As soon as Isaiah Likely was ruled out, he launched into my top 6. Haven't looked at the routes run yet. That's been his Achilles a little bit. He's just sort of limited on his route participation. but I would have expected that with likely out that he played a lot more snaps and, delivered the 6 for 68 and a touchdown, which is great production. 7 targets, second on the team.
He ran 31 routes, most on the team.
Out of 33 pass attempts. So that sort of playing time with his talent is going to result in fantasy points. It's not too complicated.
Thank goodness. The elite tight ends finally seem to be rounding into shape. All right. That was Thursday Night Football. Great game. We will get into the news. As John noted, just another quick reminder, if you are in the chats, you can drop questions in there. We will get to Q&A at the end of the show, but keep it as high-level, long-term, deep think kind of questions as possible. Easy starts this up stuff. You can go to 4for4.com and check out John's rankings and get the answer to that question pretty easily there. So do that. All right, let's get into some top-level news. Christian McCaffrey is expected to make his season debut on Sunday, Week 10. Finally, the number 1 overall pick in fantasy will be playing. The question, obviously, John, is what should we expect from him out the gate? So what do you expect from him out the gate?
Kyle Shanahan being kind of coy right now about, when they'll release the info. Thankfully, San Francisco plays early on Sunday, so we don't, not the earliest game, that's the Germany game. Super excited about getting up at 5:30 Pacific to deal with that. But the 10, hopefully there aren't any questionable players. We'll see. I'm expecting McCaffrey to make his debut, and they would be wise to ramp him up, not slowly, but not give him 20 plus touches out the gate. They need wins. So it sort of depends on how much they feel that he helps on a per play basis versus his health versus what Jordan Mason can do. If Mason he had a shoulder injury, but last I saw Mason was practicing. I would expect, 2 years ago, we had that McCaffrey-Elijah Mitchell relationship where McCaffrey wasn't seeing like 20 touches regularly because Mitchell was coming in for about 8 to 10 carries per game. And that was what led me to be a little bit concerned about McCaffrey's overall upside last year. But then they jettisoned that whole thing, and Mitchell wasn't involved even when he was healthy. And it was just basically the McCaffrey show, and he was the overall RB1. So coming back now, I'm thinking, especially in the first month that he's back, it's going to Mason playing as well as he did while McCaffrey was out will lead the 49ers to give him 8 to 10 carries per game and limit McCaffrey's workload. That doesn't mean that McCaffrey's not an RB1, in that month. I've got him ranked at 10 right now for this week because he's got so much upside on a per touch, per play basis. And they will have him, and I would assume they would have him in the red zone because of his dual threat ability. So he's got multi-touchdown upside in any given week. So that's where I'm at. I'm interested to see in a month, 6 weeks, what is that relationship in terms of touches between McCaffrey and a healthy Jordan Mason, because Mason has played well, and they can certainly keep McCaffrey fresh and healthy if they choose to do so.
Worth noting, Mason, the most recent thing we have is, as of when we were recording this, which is early Friday morning, is that Mason was downgraded to a limited practice on Thursday. It's possible that's more of like a management thing than anything, so keep a close eye on Friday's report and the final injury report to figure out what's going on there. Also worth noting, the Buccaneers defense have surrendered a ton of receptions to running backs, 55, which is the second most in the league behind the Bills. So that's a pretty nice little start off, potentially, for CMC. Okay. The other big one for the running back position is that Jonathon Brooks was activated by the Panthers. He will likely be playing this week, maybe a little bit less expectation or understanding of what he'll do than even CMC, which wasn't a lot. But on top of that, the Panthers signed Chuba Hubbard while activating Jonathon Brooks to a 4-year, $33 million contract. Why, you ask? I couldn't tell you, because they already have Miles Sanders on a big contract. though he'll likely get cut at some point soon. They are the Carolina Panthers, and to put it very frankly, I don't think they managed their franchise very well. This feels like another good example of that. Not to say Chuba Hubbard does not deserve this money. He absolutely does. He was playing incredibly. But now they've got two highly paid running backs and a highly drafted running back on their roster. So it's a lot. What is your reaction, expectation, outlook?
Well, I was actually curious to see how you're coping after the news that the contract was signed. Because
great, Bob.
Rest of season for Brooks, knowing that they are invested in Hubbard, just doesn't, it doesn't look like it's going, the RB1 season or the lead back season is going to happen for Brooks. So that's disappointing for those who have held on to him without even, especially if they didn't have an IR spot all this time. But right now, to me, he looks like, I don't know if he would call him a contingency back or attrition back, but my expectation is that Hubbard will continue to lead this backfield, might lose 2 to 3 touches as they per game as they maybe move Brooks into that Miles Sanders role. And Miles Sanders is the one that's most hurt by the arrival or emergence of Brooks as they sort of ramp him up. But I don't, unless there's some kind of injury to Hubbard or suspension or something, I don't see Brooks posting RB1 numbers on a regular basis rest of season. So we'll just have to see how they divvy up those touches. But very odd decision to draft a running back, second round.
Yeah, 46 overall.
And then turn around and give your current running back a pretty sizable deal. So there we are.
Yes. The one bit of optimism, I guess there's two bits of optimism here. One is you look at that money and you say, well, they're not going to play. They invested a lot there. They're probably not going to play any running back above that guy. But then you remember that Jonathon Brooks was drafted with the 46th overall pick, which is also a huge investment. So it's like you're heavily invested in two guys. Are you going to let them play for the job? Are you just going to split carries and go back to the D'Angelo Williams, Jonathan Stewart days? Although these two running backs are honestly more similar than those two guys were. Maybe. The other bit of optimism here is that as well as Chuba Hubbard has played, which is honestly very well, and especially in like the deeper metrics, he has been one of the best running backs in the league. But Jonathon Brooks, I believe, is also a very, very talented running back. So I don't think there's any chance that he gets as little work as Miles Sanders was getting, because Miles Sanders has been garbaggio. Whether Brooks ends up with 4, 5, 6 opportunities a game or 10 or 15 feels nearly impossible to predict right now, though I would guess it would be somewhere in that middle range, which is not enough for where we were hoping, at least I was hoping, to have him perform rest of season, but we'll see. To anyone who's like, should I drop him or should I trade him away for nothing? I would not. I would hold and see how things pan out, because you're not going to get a huge return right now, and you definitely shouldn't drop him because of the upside. That's how I feel about it. Not as excited as I once was. In brief other Panthers news, they named Bryce Young the starter for Week 10 again, which at this point seems more like Bryce has played decently well, and we're going to try to give him the shot again than anything to do with Andy Dalton's car crash, which is what initially got Bryce Young back into the starting job. So, don't know if that matters too much for fantasy, unless you're really excited about one of the new fringy up-and-coming wide receivers for the Panthers. Are you, by any chance, excited about any of those guys? Coker, Leggett. I think Adam Thielen should be back soon, but not this week.
Yeah, I mean, Adam Thielen's just going to cause headaches.
True.
When he gets back. I mean, excited is a strong word, but, Leggett, Coker might be fringe, spot starts, wide receiver 5, 6s. Leggett's been pretty decent, but hasn't had a big yardage game. I think he's had some touchdowns. Jatavion Sanders at tight end has actually played well, but whenever Tommy Tremble is active, he doesn't get as many routes. So it's just kind of a hodgepodge of ugliness in the passing game, and now we have Bryce Young, who I think sometimes sitting down for a game or two is a good reset for a young player, to sort of contemplate things, and maybe when they get another chance, they do a little better. And he has. One last note on Hubbard: he's 5th in rushing yards this season and has the number 11 yards per carry. So I just wanted to. I didn't want to rub salt in your wounds or anything as a Brooks manager, a heavy Brooks manager, but
he's been very good.
He actually has played very well. That's why he got the contract.
Yes, it is. Quick wide receiver trade news. The trade deadline happened. It was not that exciting. In fact, all the big trades happened well before the trade line. We've already talked about them. But Mike Williams was traded to the Steelers, and Jonathon Mingo was traded to the Cowboys. Do you care on either of these?
Not the Mingo one, but Mike Williams, you could see. I mean, he's a talented, high point, contested catch guy, deep ball guy. He doesn't really care about his body. Like, he's willing to sacrifice everything to make the catch. I like that about him, but it also leads to missed games.
Yes, it does.
As the number 2 receiver in Pittsburgh, which is going to be fairly run heavy due to Arthur Smith there, I'm not viewing him as a major fantasy factor rest of season. I'm sitting on him in a couple leagues just as my wide receiver 6, just to see if anything sort of comes of this. But he's a low volume, big play, and I could see him making some plays with Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson playing well in his first 2 starts, does throw a pretty nice deep ball, is willing to take shots, and that could work well with Mike Williams. And he should see single coverage most of the time with the focus on George Pickens.
Yeah, worth noting, Russell Wilson has averaged about 270 yards per game in his first 2 starts. One of those came against the Jets, thrown 3 touchdowns across those 2 games. Maybe Mike Williams would make that 4 touchdowns over 2 games, in which case he's a very solid, streamable, if not startable QB1. So I like this for him more than anything. Worth keeping an eye on him as a solid streamer. And then just a couple bits of coaching news. The Saints fired head coach Dennis Allen, to very few people's sorrow, and promoted special teams coordinator Darren Rizzi. I think it's Rizzi. Could be Ritzy. And the Raiders fired their offensive coordinator Luke Getsy and promoted their pass game coordinator Scott Turner, who I believe is the son of Norv Turner, who I believe they also brought in as an advisor. Does this shift the needle on any fantasy players for you on either team, or is it just
Well, the Getsy move is because the offense has been struggling. So anytime you have a change like that, there's at least the optimism it'll be a little better. I don't think it changes really the calculation there. It's Bowers and Jacoby Myers are the only 2 real startable players there, unless you are desperate and want to start Alexander Madison or something. So that, I think it's probably fine for Myers and Bowers. It probably isn't going to be any worse. And then Dennis Allen, defensive-minded head coach. Kendra Miller is probably the happiest person, this week. But I don't know if it's going to change
again. But
yeah, I don't know if it's going to change a whole lot with the offense there.
All right. Before we get into some injury updates, we have a brief word from our sponsor. So here is a minute on Prize Picks, and then some picks from John himself coming afterwards.
Hey everyone, John Paulson here. We know there are a ton of options out there for real money sports action, but we have found one that really stands out from the rest. Prize Picks. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to everyone. It's easy to play, and now you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as few as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is also the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy. They call it the reboot. So your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If you sign up today, you'll get $50 instantly when you play $5, and that $50 bonus is guaranteed whether you win or not. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. I play Prize Picks weekly, and I'll have a couple of my favorite plays for you after the break. So download the app today and use TMAP, TMAP, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, just download the Prize Pick app, Use the promo code TMAP, TMAP, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game.
What do you got?
All right. So
Goodness.
I thought you were gonna go into what I did last week. So I will own
Yeah,
it.
no, let us know.
1-1 last week. Bo Nix came in, but Joe Flacco had curiously low volume passing against the Vikings, who had yielded the most pass attempts per game this season heading into that game. So he did not go more than his passing yards number. But this week I've got two more, and I'm going with Saquon Barkley. 91.5 rushing yards is a big number, but I think Saquon will post more than that. He has cleared that mark in 3 straight games. And in 6 of the 8 games this season, the Cowboys have one of the worst EPA per rush defenses in the league and have allowed an average of 109 rushing yards to opposing running backs this season. Kenneth Gainwell doesn't get a whole lot of work there. It's pretty much the Barkley show. My only concern here is that we've got Cooper Rush at quarterback. And if this game does not stay competitive, that they potentially shut Barkley down. But I think the Eagles will dominate on the ground. He'll get to his 91.5 rushing yards number and go over that. The other play is Kareem Hunt. It took me a while to find my second play because I want to find something good and interesting. And my other play is Kareem Hunt. More than 18.5 carries. He has cleared this number in 4 straight games, posting 27, 22, 21, and 27 carries in consecutive games. The Chiefs are at more than a touchdown favorite at home, and that's likely to lead to positive game script for Hunt and the Chiefs, and he should be able to clear that number 18.5. So those are my 2 plays this week. Prize Picks. Run your game.
Facts. Absolutely love these smash plays of Barkley. Destroyed the Giants and the Saints, which are 2 of the only teams that are as close to the Cowboys in how bad they are on their rush defense. 147 to 176 yards in those 2 games. And they destroyed the Giants 28-3, by the way, to your point about, pulling ahead. It'll probably be Barkley who does the pulling. Love those. All right. Injury updates. CeeDee Lamb has been practicing through the sprained AC joint. If you watched that Cowboys game last week, he was clearly in pain, but kind of played through it in that game. He is expected to play through it in this game. Only problem is it's Cooper Rush at quarterback, as you just noted. Just briefly, how far does he fall down for you? And do you have any other interest in other guys there, like Jalen Tolbert, or not really?
Well, if he's healthy, Lamb is still the wide receiver 1 there. They're probably going to be in pass heavy mode for most of the season or most of the game. And Cooper Rush has not exactly tore it up. He's got a career 6.5 yards per attempt, 9 touchdowns and 6 interceptions in 7 years, 5-1 quarterback record. So I don't know if that's quite, 9 touchdowns and 6 starts, but he's got some spot play where he was in here and there. So it could be okay for him. It's not like Dak Prescott has totally torn it up, but I think he's a significantly better quarterback than Cooper Rush. And I don't think I'm going out on a limb saying that. I still have Lamb as a low end wide receiver 1 if he's fully healthy. Ferguson is still startable. Tolbert has had a couple quiet games here. He's getting a lot of snaps, but hasn't had the production. And I think with the quarterback downgrade, less interested. And then Dowdle has, kind of has a stranglehold on that RB1 job. He's getting a lot of touches. He's startable. I've got him at RB25. But you do wonder, how many times he'll carry the ball in this game if they fall behind. But he's available as a receiver and can make some plays in the passing game.
Over in Atlanta, Drake London has been limited all week with a hip injury. It was hip pointer sort of thing, which he suffered last week as well, I believe, on that incredible touchdown play that he had. We need to see the Friday report. It would be great if he could get up to a full practice. Otherwise, he's really TBD, up in the air for Sunday against the Saints, who, by the way, traded away Marshawn Lattimore. There's a little defensive news for you there. Doesn't make the fantasy news section, but it's actually kind of important for team sending your wide receivers against that team because he was their best cornerback and one of the best in the league. Main question here, if you have Drake London and he plays, you're playing him. But I am curious to you what his presence or absence does for Darnell Mooney and how excited you are about him because he's been playing pretty well and might be a fringe start for some people.
Well, he's certainly a starter in a lot of leagues now because if you just look at his year-to-date fantasy points, he's a fantasy wide receiver too. So I've got him ranked, especially in this week against the Saints, who are 17th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receiver position. I've got him ranked 18th. I think he's probably one that benefits from the presence of Drake London. He's not like a true alpha, but he's turning into a really good number 2 option, number 3 option alongside Pitts and London, especially London. So I don't know. He probably would move up a bit because he probably has a higher target floor if London is out. But I don't think I think London's going to play, and I think if you have him, you're going to be starting him.
Yeah. On the other side of that game, Chris Olave has not practiced with the concussion that he suffered on that huge hit last week. Really tough, especially for him. He has a concussion history now. I believe I saw somewhere, I wish I could reference it, 5 since college, which is real unfortunate. Very unlikely to play this week. I think it could be unlikely he plays very soon. So just something to note there. In his absence, do you care about any pass catcher? Or are you trying to start any pass catcher with reliability in New Orleans? Or is it a full
I think if you so just my general thought on what the situation. I mean, they're down really bad at receiver. I mean, they lost King Shaheed.
Yep.
And now Olave, I mean, the news on him is not favorable in terms of rest of season. Like it's looking a little dicey. He's seeing multiple specialists, and it's understandable. It's your brain.
Yep.
I would say that the Saints season is a little bit on life support here.
As noted by their Lattimore trade.
Yeah. So like we're not going to rush Olave back if they're losing. And then if this was a really good quarterback, somebody that could elevate receivers, then you'd be more interested in a Mason Tipton or a Bub Means or a Cedric Wilson, perhaps as a wide receiver 5-6 spot start type player. But right now we have Derek Carr, who's, I would say, as a starting quarterback, mediocre to below average from a fantasy standpoint, in terms of providing fantasy points for his receivers and putting them in good positions. He almost got, well, I don't want to say it was his fault that Olave took that hit, but a lot of people are saying that it was his fault that Olave took that hit.
Michael Thomas sure thinks so.
Michael Thomas said that. Michael Thomas is, he's a character too, but I think you have some interesting plays here with Alvin Kamara, weekly RB1 start, going to be very heavily involved as a receiver rest of season. Taysom Hill as a tight end because of the position is going to be involved as well, and he's starting to see some routes and starting to see some catches. I don't know that Juwan Johnson or Foster Moreau are going to be weekly startable at tight end, but they've each had their moments. Foster Moreau's actually had some nice catches. He's a big target in the red zone. So in really, really deep leagues, it's possible. But we got to see who Carr, jibes with. Maybe he starts, peppering Tipton with targets, or Bub Means when he gets back, but he's on IR, I think. Cedric Wilson, if they're seeing 10, 12 targets a game, they're going to be usable. We just don't know how this receiver depth chart's going to shake out with Olave and Shaheed out. So it's dicey.
Yeah. Worth noting, if you've got a deep bench or a deep league and you want to stash away one of those guys, probably Tipton, maybe Wilson. Not a bad idea, just in case, to John's point, Derek Carr just decides, okay, I'm going to throw the ball 10 times a game to Mason Tipton now. And then you get him on the cheap ahead of the week. But you have to have a pretty deep bench to make that happen. I will say Taysom Hill, I think, is a really big, I don't want to say winner here because that feels like taking advantage of Olave's injury, but he had 5 targets and 4 catches for 41 yards in that game last week that Olave went out with the concussion. That was the most receiving work he's seen by far all year. And if you add that to his game-by-game rushing upside and his ability to score, he's their best weapon in the red zone, arguably. him and Kamara. That makes him a very valuable tight end. So he should definitely be rostered in every league in case this kind of receiving work does go to him significantly moving forward. Nico Collins is a DNP through Thursday, did not practice. Not looking likely for week 10. Obviously, we've been hoping he would be back. He is eligible to be back, but this doesn't seem to be the week. Tank Dell is a must start for you. Close to it?
Yeah. I think, I'm surprised that Collins isn't going to play. I'm waiting to see what they do this today with today's practice. Like, he has apparently passed all of the tests and is healthy, but they're not going to play him this week. It's odd. But if he doesn't, they're giving him another week off, okay. Tank Dell, yes, would be a probable double-digit target player against a pretty shaky Lions pass defense. The Lions have one of the fewest number of carries against them, although I think the Texans will probably lean heavily on Joe Mixon regardless of what the matchup is. But Tank Dell is going to be the primary passing weapon, and now we're getting Stroud at home, where he has been significantly better than where he's played and how he's played on the road. So I think if Collins is out, you're looking at Tank Dell in the top 12, 15 in the rankings just due to sheer volume. And I think Dalton Schultz becomes a little bit more interesting as a tight end streamer, as the likely number 2 option in the passing game.
Worth noting, I just observed 36 minutes ago the Texans designated Collins for return from IR. That doesn't mean he will play. It doesn't really give all that much confidence to him playing this week really at all. It just means he could practice today. We'll see if he does. And he could play theoretically, but again, not high confidence there. So just keep an eye on the final report. I'd say it's looking less than likely. Dak Prescott, as an update to what we briefly touched on, his injury is kind of wacky. He's dealing with this serious hamstring injury that, according to Jane Slater, includes a tendon being torn off the bone. Sorry to any squeamish listeners. Reportedly takes typically more than 4 weeks to recover from this, and he may get surgery. So it looks like we can expect to be without Prescott for a while. You kind of touched on the expectations for the Cowboys receiving core. So that's what we'll probably be dealing with looking forward. Anything to add there, or are you?
Yeah, I would just say that
with this kind of. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say with Dak, you can cut him in most formats now. They're 3-5, and if they lose a couple games and they're 3-7, it's just super unlikely that they're going to be able to make the playoffs. So they're not going to rush him back in any manner. So that's all I wanted to get at. I cut him in my FFPC league, and I'm now going with the incredible combo of Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers as my committee, and hoping that the two of them can get me to the playoffs. It's just not looking great for, in general, the pass catchers there, and everybody's just kind of downgraded a bit. And with Lamb, you're still starting him, but Tolbert, you're probably not.
Yeah. Also, Trevor Lawrence is dealing with a shoulder injury that sounds pretty interestingly pessimistic. He actually may need surgery. We're waiting for any more clarity there. But he could be out for a decent amount of time. He will be out for week 10. Mac Jones should be in at quarterback. I think the main question really here, because it's all that we care about with a ton of veracity, is Brian Thomas Jr. What does this do for him? Because obviously a lot of Brian Thomas Jr. managers have been relying on him week to week. Does this change much for you or for anybody else?
Well, I did see a tweet that somebody was comparing the winning percentage of Mac Jones versus the winning percentage of Trevor Lawrence, as if that was means that that it's not a loss for the Jag. I don't know what the purpose of that was, but Mac Jones has a 6.8 yards per attempt, which is a little bit below league average. 7.1, 7.2 is usually league average. So this is not a giant I mean, you'd much rather, if you have Brian Thomas, you'd much rather Trevor Lawrence be in there, just because we've seen the rapport that they have. We've seen Lawrence target him regularly. We know what Lawrence can do. We have no idea who Mac Jones is going to favor. He might be in love with Evan Ingram, or when I said just, targeting him heavily, or another receiver there. But Parker Washington might be his favorite person on the team or something. We don't know. That's the issue. He's coming to a new team. We haven't seen him play for the Jaguars. I still think you probably are starting Thomas on hope, since he's the wide receiver one there, pretty clear, especially with Christian Kirk out. But you're kind of crossing your fingers at this point, as opposed to expecting, a nice 6 for 60 and a touchdown type game from him, which is what he's basically been giving us on a weekly basis.
I can't believe I'm going to become a Mac Jones, I won't say truther here, but just worth noting, there are worse backup quarterbacks in the league. I'd rather have Mac Jones come in than Cooper Rush. And even Cooper Rush isn't among the worst. So, this is a highly drafted guy who had some flashes for the Patriots. Could be decent. And it's not like Trevor Lawrence was lighting up scoreboards or being the best quarterback in the NFL this season, or really much at all. So we'll see. Again, worth watching. Parker Washington, as you mentioned, that's another guy like the Tipton situation where you may want to stash him away if you have a deeper bench, because if it turns out that Mac Jones really likes Parker Washington, then you get him on a discount if you talk him away this week. And then just really briefly, Keon Coleman has been listed out if you were hoping to start him. And if you were questioning whether to start Khalil Shakir with Keon Coleman out, that feels pretty close to a must-do. I don't know where he falls for you in your rankings.
Yeah, I've got him at wide receiver, I think 20, half PPR. Like, that's pretty high for him. Usually he's in the 20 to 35 range, depending on the matchup. Mari Cooper might be back, which makes things interesting. But, the big loser when Cooper comes back is probably Mac Hollins, who nobody was starting, but he catches a touchdown every once in a while. But now I think we could settle in. If Keon Coleman's out, we could settle in and probably feel pretty comfortable about starting both Shakir and Cooper.
All righty. That is the news. Let's get into the matchups, and then shortly after that, we'll get to Q&A. So last bit of time to drop more questions in the chats. Game of the week, Dolphins versus Rams is what I have chosen, though there are a couple good ones, and obviously the one last night was arguably the best. 50.5 point over-under. The Dolphins in adjusted fantasy points allowed are very good against quarterbacks and very good against wide receivers. They are terrible against running backs, so Kyren Williams is a great start. But for the wide receiver group and for Matthew Stafford, obviously Puka will be back. He was ejected last week. And Demarcus Robinson had a big game as a result. Is it just start Cooper, start Puka? Stafford is probably a no.
No, Stafford's a yes for me. I've got him at 9, even though the adjusted fantasy points allowed there. I mean, it could backfire with 3 Kyren Williams touchdowns and nothing for Stafford, but Stafford's just flat out been good when Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are available. So I with the over under where it is, and the game's at the Dome, right? So I think it's at home, this game.
It is, yes, on Monday night.
Yes. So yeah, it's like, this is a good spot for Stafford despite the matchup. Maybe you downgrade his yardage a little bit, but I feel pretty comfortable with him as a low end QB1.
Well, you know that I love to hear that, because I am still riding the old immobile men quarterback situation thing. And then on the flip side of the ball, the Rams are really not scary on defense across the board. Not particularly incredible matchups either. You're starting Tyreek Hill, you're starting Devon Achane, but I think it's probably worth asking, especially for the managers who have been starting these guys and getting really disappointed. How do you feel about Jalen Waddle and Raheem Mostert?
Well, I think if you're starting Mostert, you're probably in a desperation spot. I'm speaking from experience. Connor and I are starting Mostert. We got 2 touchdowns from him 2 weeks ago, and then not so great a game last week, but I think this is a pretty good matchup. The Rams are 15th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. He's been seeing pretty consistently 9, 8 to 10, 8 to 11 carries, and does appear to be a goal line option for them. So there's worse RB3s to start for sure. Waddle has been just kind of like, we're waiting for that. We know he's good, but we're waiting for that Waddle game. And, if it's Monday Night Football, it might be an opportunity for him to really blow up and have a good one. There is a Monday night effect, I think, for some players, and he's been kind of struggling. So I wouldn't be surprised if he had a good game. Right now, I've got him at wide receiver 30. But he would normally be in that 15 to 25 range, depending on the matchup. So it's just been a little bit disappointing. They've been getting Jonnu Smith more involved, and they're targeting Achane relentlessly. So that is, they're getting Tyreek his looks, they're getting Achane his looks, and then they're now sprinkling in Jonnu, and then the guy that's kind of out in the cold right now relative to what we're used to is Waddle. So he's a little dicey as a wide receiver 3 right now.
I do wonder a little bit whether there's been some emphasis for Tua on getting the ball out quick to his short area and his dump offs to avoid getting hit. And with that being the case, that's obviously a win for Achane. It's a win for Jonnu Smith. It's oddly kind of a win for Tyreek Hill because you can throw the ball a second and a half into the snap, 40 yards downfield, and he'll still go get it. But maybe Waddle is kind of the loser there. Fade of the week, Titans at Chargers. Both these defenses have been playing pretty well. The Titans are very good against wide receivers, which makes the already difficult question of which, if any, Chargers wide receivers do we want to start even more difficult. The Chargers have been very good against running backs, and obviously Tony Pollard is one of the few guys you feel confident about in this game. Anyone you feel really good about starting, or anyone you particularly are sitting that we might normally be starting?
Feel really good about we feel good about Dobbins due to workload, but all the other Chargers are a little dicey. I do have Quentin Johnston at wide receiver 36 right now. He did come back and got a touchdown on a broken play, but when he's been healthy, he's definitely been a touchdown target for Justin Herbert. And we do have some teams on bye, so it's kind of a short week. So there's worse options out there as a streamer. McConkey is pretty solid as well. I would feel fine with him just given his target floor. For the Titans, Ridley is fine. Like, he's seeing pretty high target floor. We might get Will Levis back, which I don't know if that's good or bad relative to Mason Rudolph. It's almost like the two Spider-Men pointing at each other, like who's better. I don't know. I guess we'll see. But Ridley, certainly with Hopkins moving on, has been pretty heavily targeted, and he's a pretty good player. So he's delivering so far. The Chargers are 14th in just fantasy points allowed to the position, so not a bad matchup for him.
There's been some hype, particularly in the waiver streets, around Nick Westbrook-Akine, who scored a touchdown in 4 straight games.
Yeah.
If you're really desperate.
Yeah, I mean, he's playing a ton of snaps, so he's out there, and he is obviously a red zone target. So, I mean, he's got a touchdown in 4 straight games. There's not a whole lot of very many players that can say that.
Nope. All right, let's get into positions. At quarterback, the good Sam Darnold gets the Jacksonville Jaguars. Every single week, the Jaguars will be in this section pretty much, unless the quarterback's too obvious. Sam Darnold is a great one because he's the kind of guy who's likely in streaming combos for some people. He is an incredibly good start. I'd be curious how high he gets for you. And then Daniel Jones gets the Panthers. Obviously, Daniel Jones, it's tough to trust him, but he gets rushing fantasy points. Every once in a while, he has a good game through the air. This is a good matchup. Panthers are 30th. Where are these guys for you? Or do you have any others?
I think they're both in. I didn't put Darnold in because he's kind of a clear start, but Daniel Jones is a sneaky start this week. Just starting with Jones, he's just kind of whack-a-mole. Like, you're trying to find his good games, and you think you got it lined up, and then he gives you 6 points or something. But this projects to be a good game for him. Carolina is 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. He's got his 2 top receivers are healthy. Theo Johnson's emerging a little bit. Tight end, he's got a Tyrone Tracy at running back as well. So this is certainly a game where he should be pretty good. I've got him ranked QB 17. It's just hard to start him over guys like Stroud at home against Detroit or Aaron Rodgers now that he's got 2 stud receivers. Those types of players. It's just hard to trust Jones, but he does get some rushing, and this just is a pretty good profile. This is a good game for him. Darnold is a QB 17 or QB 7. Jacksonville is last in the league in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position, and I'm hoping here for this ranking to come true that Mac Jones is able to keep the Jaguars in the game, because this could easily turn into 20, 25 point lead or 28 point lead at halftime, and they now don't have to throw the ball much in the second half. So that's the concern. But if they do get that sort of lead, then Darnold probably has already done his damage and has had a good game. There is a way for this to all go sideways, and Darnold has 150 yards passing and Aaron Jones has 3 touchdowns. But this definitely profiles for a good game from Darnold. He's played very well this year. He's also got Hockenson back. So he's got a full complement of receivers.
On the bad side, a few notable ones here. One, Patrick Mahomes, or anyone who kept faith in Patrick Mahomes through a long stretch of bad. He had a great game last week, so it feels like maybe you should roll him right back out there. He gets the Broncos, who are 4th in AFPA. I think a major question there is, how much does DeAndre Hopkins and Travis Kelce getting back to Travis Kelce ways, how much do those two things kind of elevate Mahomes back to where he had been in fantasy in prior years? So can you start him against the Broncos or not? Then the other ones of interest, Kirk Cousins against the Saints, who are 7th in AFPA, but again, it's worth noting they traded away their best cornerback. So I'll be curious how that pans out for them. And then Kyler Murray, who's been very spotty, gets the Jets, who are 5th. Obviously, he gets a lot of his fantasy points from rushing, which isn't as reliant here on the Jets secondary. But what are your opinions or takeaways here?
Yeah, QB 8 for Mahomes. 2 good games in a row. The matchup does worry me a bit that they go run heavy, and I did tout Kareem Hunt's carries in the prize pick segment. So that is a little worrisome, and given his overall play, it's a little worrisome. But it's Patrick Mahomes, and that's what you said. Well, whoever kept the faith, it's not that hard. He's the best quarterback in the league. I don't think there'd be too many quarterbacks taken ahead of him if we redrafted everybody in real football. And then now he's got a pretty decent target at the wide receiver 1 spot with Hopkins. Obviously, Kelsey's still awesome. So I feel he's a pretty confident start. And this is also a weird week where you get into those high-end QB2 rankings, and it's just the matchups aren't great, or the players themselves haven't been that consistent. Some of the better scorers have some bad matchups. So like Kyler Murray, for example, I've got him at 14. The Jets are 5th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. He came in initially in the top 10, but I just feel uncomfortable with that given the likelihood that the Jets really limit the passing. And so he's having to run, which is fine. I think he can get there on that, but it's harder to trust Murray if it's just rushing and we can't count on 250 yards passing and a touchdown or 2. And then the other player was Kirk Cousins that you mentioned. Have him at QB 10 on the road in the dome. Lattimore's gone. This is another one where do the Falcons have to throw a lot in the second half, or is this game out of hand already because the Saints can't keep up? But, this is a divisional matchup, but probably will stay competitive. I feel pretty confident that he's going to have a good game. But again, he's in this group here where, you could start you can pick choose your own adventure, I think, with this QB2 low end QB1 group this week.
All right, let's get to running backs. This one is interesting. DeAndre Swift faces the Patriots, who are 30 in AFPA, 30th, which means great, very green matchup. The reason that I wanted to bring up Swift, pretty much everyone who has him is starting him, but I had a little bit deeper question for you. He has been very, very good over the last month or so. Anyone who's been rostering him is very excited about the fact that he's had like 4 or 5 straight very good games. If you go to 4for4.com and you pull up his player page, which is a very smart thing to do, you should do it. You get his schedule and you can see the AFPA and the colors. His last 5 games, including this one, the AFPA rank are 32nd, 31st. Then he had his bye, 17th, 20th, and now 30th against the Patriots. And over the rest of the season, it is very red. I'm curious how confident you feel about Swift moving forward rest of season.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing a touch floor because he's established himself as the RB1. It just, you may not be as productive as he has been over the last several games. And even last week against Arizona, 20th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, he only had 51 yards on 16 carries, 3.2 yards per carry, but they fed him 6 catches for 31 yards. So they're finding ways to get the ball to him, even if the running game's not going that great. And this is not the greatest running game in the world, the Bears. They've struggled. He had a great game against Washington, 7.2 yards per carry, 129 yards rushing. Great game against Jacksonville, another bad rush defense, 91 yards rushing, 5.4. Before that, though, only one game over 3.5 yards per carry, and that was against the Rams. The other 4 games, all below 3.5. So saying all that, it does look a little dicey heading into the playoff run. Might not be a bad idea to flip him if there's somebody that is a similar value and maybe that manager is not paying attention to strength of schedule down the stretch. But you're going to want to get somebody that's getting consistently 15 carries, 15 to 20 touches, 15 to 22 touches per game in return, and just hopefully find somebody similar talent that has a better rest of season schedule.
Worth noting, as you pointed out, with the potential for pass catching usage, the 4 red matchups on his schedule are Minnesota, Detroit, Minnesota, and Detroit, all in a 5-week span. You figure he's probably going to get involved in the passing game against those offenses. Other RBs this week with good matchups. Tyrone Tracy gets the Panthers, who are 32nd in Munich at 6:30 a.m. our time, 9:30 a.m. Eastern. By the way, to any of you Easterners who complain about, the late games and how you have to stay up, just know that we have to get up at 6:30 a.m. for these international games, and it is rough, especially when it's Giants-Panthers. But it's a great matchup for Tyrone Tracy. And then on the other side of the ball, Chuba Hubbard / Jonathan Brooks get the Giants, who are also pretty bad, 23rd. So that one, both, you're probably not starting Jonathan Brooks. I am curious how high you have Chuba Hubbard ranked, assuming Brooks is back.
Yeah, so there's just a little bit of what you wonder, like, okay, what are they going to do with Brooks? Are they going to try to work Brooks and Miles Sanders in? And then now you are starting to eat into Hubbard a little bit. So I've got him at RB20. But the guys he's below, Chase Brown had a good game last night, Kareem Hunt, James Cook, J.K. Dobbins. I mean, it's totally reasonable that you would start those guys over Hubbard, just given what we know about the Panther backfield with Brooks back, which is not a lot. I would feel better about Hubbard, though, after this contract, because it just does seem like he's a long-term piece for this team, and they're not going to just say, okay, we drafted Brooks in the 2nd round, so he's going to play half the snaps. It's just not going to work that way.
On the bad side, 2 pretty similar situations, actually. Rico Dowdle gets the Eagles, who are 3rd in AFPA to running backs. You imagine he would be involved in the passing game there in comeback mode. And then Javonte Williams is at Kansas City, who are 1st, and by a very strong amount against running backs. Again, you would hope maybe he'd be involved in the passing game. Are these guys fringe RB2s for you? Do you feel okay putting them in the lineup still?
You mentioned both of them, and I feel significantly better about Rico Dowdle, but looking at the rankings, he's at RB25, and Javonte Williams is at RB29. So it is only a 4 or 5 spot difference. I don't feel great about just the nature of the running back rankings when you get these guys in bad matchups and sort of. You mentioned the pass catching for Dowdle. I feel good about that. Like, if he's got a chance to get 4 to 6 catches if the running game's not going well, which is unlikely that it will go well. And they will be in catch-up mode, so you can count on some PPR or half PPR points from him. And then Javonte, I mean, this is the worst matchup for a running back in the league. Volume is the problem. And the other issue that is Dowdle's not dealing with, that Javonte is dealing with, is a running quarterback. Nick's getting some, rushing touchdowns. They're trying to get Estime involved as well. And Jaleel McLaughlin is still around. So it's just Javante's getting poked from all directions, and plus it's a bad matchup, so I would try to avoid him. And I've got him ahead of Raheem Mostert, but that's really debatable whether or not I would start Javonte over Mostert given the matchups.
Just for some deeper context for the listeners on the Chiefs and AFPA, the worst team in the league allows 30 points per game to the running back position. That's the Panthers. The league median is around 20 fantasy points per game. The second place team in AFPA is the Vikings. That's 16 fantasy points per game. And the Chiefs are at 10. They are absurd. You do not want to play your fringe running backs against them. So if you can get away, as John mentioned, 29th for him, even in a week with multiple buys, and that includes some good running backs. So try to if you can. All right, wide receivers. The good Buffalo gets the Colts, who are 24th. We mentioned Keon Coleman is out. Shakir is in. We'll see who else suits up for them. But might be some interesting plays there. The Jaguars wide receivers with Mac Jones get the Vikings, who are 30th. So that helps with the can we start Brian Thomas even with Mac Jones in thing. Jordan Addison on the flip side of that game, I don't need to mention Justin Jefferson, but Jordan Addison gets to face the Jaguars. And obviously we mentioned Darnold is a great play against this secondary. They are 31st in AFPA. And then one other interesting one I'd throw out there is Jameson Williams, because he will be back, reactivated after his suspension. He gets the Texans, who are 28th. So I'm curious how willing you'd be to throw him back in a lineup.
Yeah, Jordan Addison and Jameson Williams both made sneaky starts. So feeling pretty good about both of them. And I would say trust Jameson Williams. The one concern I have is that, he's more of a lower volume, deep ball guy, but, he's coming off of suspension, so he's fully healthy. They should get him right back out there. Texans, as you mentioned, a great matchup. So I would expect him to come out and have a good game. It's possible he doesn't, but, they've given up an average of 11.1 catches for 150 yards, 1.56 touchdowns to opposing receivers. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown could get all that. he's good enough.
Yeah.
But he has posted at least 75 receiving yards in 4 of 6 games this season, so I feel pretty good about Williams, and I feel pretty good about Addison as well, although I think as TJ Hawkinson ramps up, he gets a little bit shakier as a start just due to, the target floor maybe not being there week to week.
On the bad side, the Chiefs wide receivers, we mentioned it with Patrick Mahomes, get the Broncos, who unsurprisingly are one of the best with their secondary, 4th in AFPA. That one's, it is interesting for DeAndre Hopkins, who seems to have established himself as maybe an actually legitimate fantasy play now with the rapport with Patrick Mahomes growing. So how does that hold up against this secondary? And then also Xavier Worthy, is he even playable at all anymore? I'm curious what your take is on him, because he gets his big play every now and then, but it's very spotty. And then on the flip side of that same game, Courtland Sutton, if you've been playing him recently, you've been loving it. He had 100+ yards in 2 straight games. He's looked very good recently. He gets the Chiefs, who are 2nd in AFPA. And I, for one, never trust Courtland Sutton, but I'm curious how you feel. Maybe you can bring me down to earth a little bit on him.
Well, it just sort of depends on your roster and what your options are, because, it's Courtland Sutton. Other than that weird 0 target goose egg that he had a few weeks ago, he has been pretty consistently seeing heavy targets, and Bo Nix is not that bad. I don't love this matchup, but in a short week, you got guys injured. You can roll him out there and feel pretty good that you might get 8 to 12 targets out of him. And he should be able to give you 4 or 5 catches off of that. As for Hopkins, the same logic applied to Zay Flowers against Denver. I downgraded him. The guy ends up with 5 catches for 127 yards and 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it does project to Hopkins getting shadowed by Surtain. But again, you have a very quality quarterback. The quality of the targets are very high. And I think Hopkins is startable as a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 on a team that really needs him to make plays in the passing game.
All right, finishing off with tight ends. On the good side, Dalton Kincaid. I don't know how confident you've been feeling about Dalton Kincaid if you have him on your roster, but the Colts are 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. So that's if you're going to play Kincaid, it's certainly in this matchup. And then TJ Hawkinson, who wasn't heavily involved in his first game, but it was his first game, and he did still have a few catches. He gets the Jaguars, who are 29th. On the bad side, I'll just go through all these and you can give me your thoughts. Jake Ferguson, who's been a pretty decent stream, gets the Eagles, who are first in AFPA. They do not give up points to the tight end position. And then Dalton Schultz, you mentioned a little earlier, gets the Lions, who are third. And on the flip side of that, Sam Laporta gets the Texans, who are fourth. And obviously, again, like Kincaid, we've been hoping for a lot for him. So this is a lot of guys I think a lot of people had good hopes for. Where do they fall for you this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Kincaid, matchup is favorable. He has seen at least 6 targets in 6 straight games, and that's the sort of usage that you're looking for if you're streaming the position or just kind of crossing your fingers and hoping that you get something. With Keon Coleman out, that probably helps him a little bit as well. Maybe he's a little bit more of a target for Josh Allen. 10 targets last week, only 4 catches against Miami, but he's got at least 3 catches in 4 straight games. So there's definitely worse options out there. Plus the matchup is good, as you mentioned. Hawkinson, I think if I remember correctly, he ran a route on 25 of 41 dropbacks or pass attempts last week, which was a very encouraging usage first game back from this long layoff. So I think they're going to ramp him up quickly, and unless they have a plan where they're going to do this sort of usage for a month and then they're going to start ramping him up. But for that being the first game, I think they're going to try to get him out there more frequently, although Josh Oliver, I believe, caught a touchdown last week, frustrating many Hawkinson managers, I'm sure. He's certainly a little bit startable. He's fringe tight end 1 now, just given that route participation in the matchup. Ferguson, certainly worried about him with the change of quarterback, but he might be Cooper Rush's roommate. I don't know. So like breakfast, maybe they're getting breakfast together like Puka did with Stafford last year. Schultz, I think, is fine. It's not a great matchup, but if Nico Collins is out, yes, you can start him. If Nico Collins is in, I probably would not, or try to avoid it. And then Laporta with Jameson Williams back, bad matchup, worrying me a little bit. They just haven't schemed him as heavily as they should, given his talent and what he did last year as a rookie.
Tough for Laporta drafters, especially where he was drafted. All right, let's get into Q&A. Keep dropping those questions in if you've got them. We'll start it off with Sam Burks, who asks, PPR League, is sending Garrett Wilson for David Montgomery a trade worth making for rest of the season? I will give my answer very quickly here, John, because I had this exact offer yesterday. Somebody tried, I was trying to get a running back because I'm in desperate need. Both my running backs are on bye this week, and I literally don't have a single one on my bench. So I was desperate. Someone offered me David Montgomery for Garrett Wilson, and I turned it down. And then I ended up going and instead getting Chase Brown for Tucker Kraft because I have good tight ends, which worked out great for me. So I wouldn't do this, but I'm curious if you would disagree there.
I would agree with your take on it. Wilson is at wide receiver 13, and that might be a little low. He's very high this week against the Cardinals in the top 5. And what I think with Lazard out, it's just very concentrated between Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson, and there's enough for both of them to produce. They're probably both going to see 10 targets a game on a weekly basis. Montgomery is good, but he is tailed off a little bit. Gibbs getting the touchdowns. He got the start against the Packers, ran pretty well, but he's splitting time and is not as dominant of a red zone option for the Lions. So I've got him ranked more as a running back 2, whereas I think Wilson is a low end wide receiver 1 now. So I think you should be aiming a little higher with the running back that you're trying to get for if you're going to trade Wilson away.
Yep. All right, Michael Quenzel. In a Superflex Dynasty League, I know you're not deep in the Dynasty streets, John, but this feels like a relatively easy one. Drake May or Derek Carr? And then Michael also broke down a trade that he made in this Dynasty League. But this one is another, I think, easy one for me, Michael, because, and we can throw it to the redraft listeners as well. I like Drake May better than Derek Carr right now this year. And obviously, he's a rookie who has a ton of growth to be had in the future, weapons to be garnered around him. I think it's only going to get better for Drake May.
Yeah, I don't know if he's asking who should start May between May and Carr. But yeah, certainly in Dynasty, May has more value. A lot more.
If so, it would also be May for me there. It's May everywhere for me over Derek Carr. I just don't trust him. Whatever happened in those first 2 weeks, that has to be the biggest mirage that I can remember in fantasy recently. They looked like the greatest offense that ever lived, hung 40-something in like a couple straight weeks, and then have done absolutely nothing since then. Mad Max, would you all trade Brian Thomas Jr., obviously the quarterback situation there is up in the air as we've talked about, for Debo? I also have CMC. This one's maybe a little tougher.
I mean, I think Debo's going to rocket the second half of the season with Brandon Ayuk out. So given the possible loss of Trevor Lawrence, I would do this trade, even if I have CMC.
Yeah, I think I would agree there. Debo, when healthy, and he has to stay healthy, but when healthy, was honestly playing great, even with Brandon Ayuk. This is going to be a big target volume upgrade for him, I would expect. And to your, question or concern about CMC, this is the kind of offense that I don't worry about having two players when they're this talented of players on the same team. So I think you can feel pretty good about that. MacFam says, if I were to stash a CMC backup, would it be Mason or Garendo? With Mason now having some history of shoulder injuries / sprain. It's feel like it's still Mason, but do you want both, or would you consider moving to Garendo if the injury continues to bother him, John?
Sort of have to see what the situation is this week. My feeling is that Mason was full. I thought he was full on Wednesday, maybe limited yesterday, and so I think maybe they were just giving him a day of rest or a day of light work. We'll see what happens today, but it would be Mason if Mason is healthy. I mean, you might run into a week where he's not, and then it's Garendo. But if he's practicing this week, I would think that they're planning on Mason being available rest of season.
Yeah, I would lean Mason as well, but Garendo's not a bad one if you guys are in deeper leagues. Sam Burks asks, what do you think Brandon Cooks will do fantasy-wise returning with the Cowboys, and is he worth stashing? I think the additional question here, John, is what does it do to Jalen Tolbert, who is a little bit interesting, and then obviously all of this is colored by the presence of Cooper Rush instead of Dak.
Yeah, you got to downgrade a quarterback, so that's going to downgrade these fringe guys unless they are, for some reason, roommates, breakfast buddies, whatever, to where they're going to get extra targets or they have a great rapport. You sometimes see that with backup quarterbacks. They tend to have a good rapport with the backup receivers. We're not talking about the backup receivers right now. We're talking about Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert. I probably would find somebody else to stash. I don't have a ton of confidence that Cooks is going to come back and be a major fantasy factor with Cooper Rush at quarterback, and it's looking pretty likely that Dak's going to miss several weeks. So there probably is somebody more intriguing out there in the waiver wire.
Agree. Martin Corza says, trade Jacobs and Debo. It's Josh Jacobs and Debo for CMC and James Conner. This is an interesting one. Obviously positional because you're getting two running backs for a running back and a wide receiver. You're swapping 49ers. Jacobs is on bye this week, so I don't know how that much matters to you. Ooh. This is tough.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on your receiver situation. So you're giving up Debo. So can you take the hit at receiver? And is this upgrading your running back situation? It must be.
What?
Like, who's your RB3 who is currently your RB2, to run alongside Jacobs.
If we assume let's assume that Debo would be in the flex for him, so he's his third best receiver, and there's 2 wide receiver slots. So you're essentially just swapping running back for running back and then flex for flex. In that case, for me, I think I lean the CMC and Connor side. The upside for CMC is just so absurdly high. If he gets anything close to what we expect he was the number 1 overall pick in fantasy. Even if he gets, 80% of the touches or opportunities that we expected for him, that's still an elite RB1. And then Connor's been playing great. I lean that way, I think, by a hair, but it's not convincing.
He has been, Connor has been playing great, and it kind of flies under the radar that he's been playing great, but he's a funny guy too, because he has not played more than 13 games. He played. Let me rephrase that.
He's never played a full season.
He's never played a full season. He's only played more than 13 games once since 2018.
Not great.
He had a 15-game season with Arizona. So he's always seems to miss 3 or 4 games. He's got 9 games in right now, and you just wonder, is it a ticking time bomb, or is he going to be fine and have one of his, play 16, 17 games this year? So that's the one thing that but I mean, Debo's been kind of dinged up for his part. I probably would do this if I could take the hit at receiver because of CMC's upside.
Yeah, I think I agree there. All right. Brief thank you to Jay Lizard for the super sticker. No question there. Some other comments in the chat, but no question there. So thank you for that. Jesse Driscoll asks, please help. I have Cup and Puka. Should I roll with both or try and trade one for Wilson, that being Garrett Wilson? Also, Tyreek Hill, will he ever have a big game? Should I try and move on from him? Well, I can answer the last question first. Yes, I think Tyreek Hill will have a very big game. Probably several of them. Tua back, give him a couple games to reconnect. I think we'll see that several times. But the trade question is very interesting. I don't know how you feel about that. You may just have Garrett Wilson ahead of one of these guys rest of season, regardless of the fact that you have 2 on the team.
I'm a little leery on Puka right now, just with this knee constantly bugging him. I would probably see if the Garrett Wilson manager would take Puka for him. I don't know if he would. Garrett Wilson coming off the big game and looking pretty good with Devontae Adams in the fold. Just looking at schedule too, the Rams do have kind of a tougher schedule. They've got some mediocre matchups and bad matchups, and then looking at Garrett Wilson, he does have his bye coming up, which is makes him hits his value a little bit, but he's got several good matchups coming up with a couple bad ones. So, and they're not that it's Miami and Buffalo, so it's not like crazy bad. Yeah, I would try. I don't know if Cup for Garrett is tougher, but I think Puka for Garrett, just given the Puka's buggy knee injury, I think that would be a good move.
Yeah, I would agree there. I think I would take Wilson over Puka in a vacuum, and the fact that you've got both and can diversify by getting Wilson is great. I will throw this just briefly out there on Garrett Wilson. He had a not so great start to the season. His first month, he didn't top more than 60 receiving yards in a game, had 1 touchdown over that first month. And I think that sometimes that can calcify in people's minds. You decide that Garrett Wilson is just not good for this year. He was a bust based off how that first month goes. But since then, he's been unbelievable. 101 yards, 107 yards, 61, 113, 90. And he scored 4 touchdowns in his last 5 games. Obviously, a few great games with Devontae Adams in the fold. So he's elite at this point, and I think it might be going a little bit under the radar because of how he started the season. I would definitely make that move if you can. Though, as John noted, TBD whether that manager will make that trade. Bobby Ortiz, this may be the last question. We'll see if there's any others while John answers this. Should I trade away Tyreek Hill, another Tyreek question, for Jalen Reed and Brian Robinson? My second RB is Javonte Williams. Interesting.
I the whole Tyreek Hill thing. I 4 for 80 last week, 6 for 72. He just feels like there's going to be a blow up game here. He's got 1 touchdown on the season. Tua is back. His best game with Tua, 7 for 130 and a touchdown. And the playoff schedule to me, Houston, San Francisco, and Cleveland, weeks 15 through 17. Although that Cleveland game could end up being a windstorm, sideways 40-mile-per-hour sideways winds at Cleveland. But so it's Jaden Reed is the Packers wide receiver 1, but he's not necessarily as involved or as game plan for as Hill is. I don't hate this trade though, because if Brian Robinson's got this nagging like hamstring injury. I think he's dealing with core injury, but it appears like he's going to be back, and this would certainly upgrade your running back 2, giving you a weekly guy you can start. Although they're a little bit of a committee there in Washington. But I think they'd like to just get to Robinson, Eckler as their 2 guys. I don't hate this trade. What do you think?
It's really close for me. I think it might depend a little bit on the rest of your roster and how much additional depth you have. I think the upgrade from Javonte to Brian Robinson is good and useful, but not necessarily insane. Jaden Reed, while playing well, I think to John's point, I don't know if he has the upside that Tyreek Hill has rest of the season. So this is similar to the CMC trade from earlier. Trading away Tyreek Hill, to me, you want to get something elite back. And Jaden Reed is close to that. But if I could get Jaden Reed and someone a little bit better than Brian Robinson, I think I would feel better about this. That said, if you don't have much other running back depth and you really need this because not only is your second RB Javonte Williams, but then when, your first or second RB is on bye, then you have no one. And that's even more fuel to the fire of this trade being worth it. And, Jaden Reed could have nearly as many good wide receiver 1 weeks as Tyreek Hill rest of the season. It's just whether or not he has that absolute max upside.
I would also just add that if you are going to trade for Jaden Reed, you got to get his name right. You've got Jalen Reed in here.
Yes.
And Jalen's not even spelled like anybody that I've seen spelled. So just treat him with respect if you do trade for him. He is wide receiver 7 on the year. Tyreek Hill at wide receiver 35. So now there's a lot of context there.
What a world.
Right. There's a lot of context there. And then you're looking at Jaden. I think I would might do this because you look at Jaden Reed's rest of season schedule, and he does have Chicago out of the gate week 11, but San Francisco not bad, Miami 7th, and then 14th through 17. Listen to this: at Detroit 27th, at Seattle 25th, New Orleans at home 17th, and Minnesota at Minnesota 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. So those that can get to the playoffs with Jaden Reed, who has played well, but all of a sudden have that sort of matchup in the playoffs, you're going to get a lot of good production there.
Yep. Good one. Good question. Tough trade.
Just be prepared.
All
just
right.
mentally prepare yourself. Hold on. Mentally prepare yourself for Tyreek going, crazy down the stretch because he has that ability.
Probably the week after you trade him, because that's how fantasy works. He will go insane. All right. Good ones. Good questions. Thank you, everybody, for them. Again, if you had more of a straight up simple start sit question, go to 4for4.com. Find John's rankings. There are rankings in each of the different formats in terms of like PPR, half PPR. So you can go through those and find the answer to your question. Can't get to all of them here. But thank you for being here. Great show. Lots of good stuff. Good luck in week 10. We are more than halfway through the fantasy season, and we're almost to that point where we're starting the playoff push. So make a bunch of great moves and set yourself up for that. We will see you next week. Adios.